Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm back tonight. Our intro new show of Dark Matters. Dark Matters itineration numero dos, number 2, back after several years. As many of you may know that 3-4 years ago, I had a show on KGRA that came over from actually another radio station, Cyber Station USA, that was Dark Matters. This is a show that actually I began almost 20 years ago in 2004 with, at the time, my co-host was actor Dwight Schultz, who I'm sure you will know from The A-Team, Star Trek Generations, Star Trek Voyager, and we did it for a number of years. But then things moved along. We had been on a satellite station that unfortunately was basically starting to, let's just say they were bringing on some shows with a political edge that I didn't agree with. It was, believe it or not, somewhat racist, and we bailed. Well, when Cyberstation began in 2010, that's when Dark Matters Radio really got kicked off. And over the years, now actually, my broadcasting literally goes back to 1991. And over the years, I've interviewed practically anybody and everybody in this field that we're most interested in, which is the paranormal, UFO, and today, I guess if we're being politically correct, UAP field. But we've hit many, many, many oddities over the years, and we're going to be doing that with my full intention this time around. But joining me now, who will be co-hosting with me, are two very dear, very close friends. Mark Center, who basically, Mark, wave at everybody. There you go.
Yeah, because I couldn't tell which one was him.
Yeah, well, it's that one down there with the orange shirt on. Mark was one of our mainstays on Dark Matters Radio with KGRA in the past. At that time, Richard Saraday, a very dear friend that I lost a couple of years ago, he passed away from an illness. But Richard had been with me, and Mark ended up joining us, a guy that can research the hell out of damn near everything. And then Mr. Gerry Kissell, who basically kind of got me back into regular broadcasting because I had kind of eased off. Several years ago, I was in an accident where I fractured a vertebrae, and boy, that laid me up for a bit. And I just decided, you know what? I've been doing this broadcasting so long. I've never lost an interest in the field, but you know, it was becoming, I was feeling kind of blasé about it all. Well, Gerry and I had met way back in the early part of this century, and he got in touch First thing out of his mouth was, "Well, I'm glad to see you're not dead."
Oh,
And I said, "Yeah, that's two of us." And then he said, "Well, I'm doing this show on Wednesdays called UFO Wednesday on my podcast." He said, "How would you like to come on?" Well, I ended up doing that. And then we started another show on the same day called Dangerous Military Nerds. And I'm former military. Gerry is former military. And we basically ended up doing that for a while. But then I said, "You know what? Man, this is too crazy. I'm doing 2 shows a day within a couple hours of each other, each one 2 hours long. I'm going to back off." So we ended up just doing the UFO show. And then this slot right here on KGRA opened up. I talked to my buddy Bill Skywatcher. Bill said, "Man, we'd love to have you back." Well, here I am. Guys, Gerry, do you got any intro you'd like to go into?
No. You said it pretty succinctly, but it's true because I hadn't talked to you in like years, and I saw that your show was over, and immediately my panic was, "Oh my God, he died." I couldn't find anything on you, and I'm like, "Oh my God, and then I found your number buried in my old contacts, and I called you, and you answered, and I'm like, "Is it Don Ecker?" "Oh, thank God you're not dead." Because I was worried.
Yeah.
I really was like, "Oh my God, you're like the coolest person I know when it deals with ufology." No.
Yeah. Well, then there's Mr. Mark Center. Mark, you got any words of wisdom, buddy?
I call Don twice a day. I check on his bowel movements. I'm very close to Don.
Okay. Would you say you're a fecal-philiac?
Yes. In fact, I worked in that field for about 20 years, so I'm not afraid of fecal. Anyway, I was surprised that he did this because he got a little burnt out there for a little while, and I'm glad that he's back. He's needed, and it'll be interesting to see how things unfold with all the craziness in Congress and punk bass players who are going to save us all and things of that sort, right? So it's going to be very interesting to see where this goes.
Well, my wife has been on a spiritual path. Well, actually, all the time that we've known each other, that's 35 years. This year, she and I will be married 30 years, although for all intents and purposes, it's been 35 years. But she tells me, "Don, this is your ministry." And I said, "Oh, really? Oh, how does that go? Do I get to give communion? Do I have the communion wine here?" But yeah, that's what she says. So I figure she must be onto something.
So I suppose you heard the latest, and the first place that I heard it was a couple of days before it broke on the Steve Cambian show, The Truth Seekers, where he was talking about Grusch, and in his view, now remember, this was before this broke. In his view, he felt that Grusch might be a little autistic or something. He's got a son who's autistic and a bunch of people in his family and extended family. He's got a lot of experience there. And then 2 days later, that weirdness gets released that he had some psychiatric issues or something, drug addiction or something. They didn't take away his papers.
Security clearance.
Yeah, very interesting. I don't know if any of that's true or they're just trying to throw this on the wall to shut him up.
Okay, look, I have some expertise in that field. When I was in the Army, I was in intelligence. I was in intelligence in the field, and I'm talking about the jungle, not out here on the sidewalk. But we were conducting intelligence operations against the North Vietnamese, okay, the communists. So as a result of all that, I bumped heads with spooks, CIA, and others. Our
NSA.
command authority was no such agency, NSA. All of our stuff that we gathered went not to the CIA, not to the Department of the Army, but to the NSA. Okay? Now, as long as I've been involved in the UFO field, and that's going back to the late 1980s, I have been into it up to my eyebrows, both Vicky, my wife, and I. And I can tell you, we bumped heads with spooks for a while. And this is going to sound like a conspiracy blab, but it's true. We were under surveillance. We were under government surveillance because of several stories that we broke in the pages of the magazine, not to mention the people I interviewed on my radio shows then. But the bottom line was they had an interest. Now, for almost 80 years, they have claimed, the military, the intelligence, the federal government, have claimed that there's nothing to this UFO business. And we know that's pure crap. That's not true. They've lied about it from day one. So there's something going on. Now, over the years, they have gone out of their bloody way to destroy people that have not adhered to the party line. Okay? In other words, shut your mouth. Now, Grusch, the fact that he even came out, number one, I find that astounding. All right? I find that astounding. And how he got apparently permission from the powers that be, at least in one part of the intelligence field, to come forward and talk, although everything that man has said, and I've checked on this, has been secondhand.
Mm-hmm.
Grusch has not ever claimed, at least in open public forums, that he saw anything. Now, I have been off and on for the last 4 or 5 months working on a paper specifically designed to explore disclosure. And one thing that I have come up with, the paper's not done yet, but the one thing I came up with is this. Okay? Now listen to what I'm about to say very carefully. There is a core secret wrapped around this UFO enigma, a core secret that only the very upper ups, the elites, have any inkling of. And that core secret is protected by something called an SAP, a special access program. And to even get an inkling of what they're protecting, you must be on something called the bigot list. Now, a couple of years ago, I wrote a paper on the Admiral Thomas Wilson, and I can't offhand, I'm always forgetting this guy's name, this scientist that used to be with NIDS under Robert Bigelow. I wrote a paper about this. The reason was back in the mid to latter 90s, Admiral Thomas Wilson, who was the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, the military's equivalent of the CIA, was convinced by a number of people that there was something to the UFO, the overall UFO thing. And he went searching around the Pentagon. Someone somewhere pointed him to private industry, an aerospace corporation. Now, why would he be pointed to that? Well, allegedly, they had recovered technology from off this world that they were working on and attempting to back engineer. This was the rumor. So Admiral Wilson, as director of the DIA, called these people up and they said, well, Admiral, we can't talk to you. You would have to come out here and we would have to speak in a classified area. Well, purportedly, Wilson flew out to California, went to this aerospace corporation. They took him into a secured vault. He started asking his questions, and the director of security pulled out a manual that was the bigot list. He checked. Wilson's name was not on it. And they said, well, sorry, Admiral. Too bad you made the strip. The bigot list.
What does that mean? What do they mean by that?
Well, those are the people that are allowed, that have been read into the program, at least in part. And unless your name is in there,
You're not
you don't get nothing from nothing. Okay. And Wilson was furious, flew back to DC, was going to raise hell. And then somebody pulled him aside and said, look, you're about ready to retire. You want to keep your Admiral stars. You want to have your nice, comfy pension. If you kick up a fuss, you're at risk of losing all that. Now, how do I know this? Well, basically, it came from Dr. Edgar Mitchell, because Wilson was contacted by this scientist, and they had a private meeting in an automobile in the parking lot of EG&G in Las Vegas. Okay?
Right.
And obviously, the only way that this information could have been secured, the guy taped what Wilson was telling him, had a voice recorder and recorded the whole conversation. Then he wrote it up. Then he gave it to, among other people, Edgar Mitchell. When Edgar Mitchell died several years back, this document was found in his papers. Now, today, in full disclosure, Wilson totally denies any and everything about this. But by federal statute, he has no recourse except to deny it, because this program is basically protected by an SAP. Now, if a program is protected by a SAP, even the name of the program is classified. Like, for example, with the remote viewing, with Project Grill Flame or Stargate, even saying that, if it were protected by an SAP, you could go to federal prison. So there you go.
So how
Davis, Eric Davis is the guy.
Can we? I had to change my microphone, so can you hear me? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Because the resources on my computer are going crazy. So when we're listening to Lou and Grusch and whomever, and then they start to, like, Lou's thrown some names out of.
You're talking about Lou Elizondo,
right? He's thrown some names out of supposed groups, right, and things that they were doing. you would then think that those aren't covered in an SAP, right? Because he wouldn't even be able to mention those if they were covered in an
Right.
SAP.
Right. And if they were under that classification, then he would be in deep doo-doo. Yeah.
Right, right. And I don't think, has Grusch mentioned any any groups and names like that yet of things that might be covered in an SAP or could have been?
Not in open session, no.
Right.
Now,
right.
whatever happened in their classified sessions, I have no way of knowing, obviously.
Yeah, of course. Because there's been a lot said about people who have looked into Lou's background, and a lot of people say he's full of S. That a lot of what he said is not necessarily made up, but bent a little bit. It doesn't seem to be that he's being really honest or clear about what he was doing and what his involvement was.
Well, this is where you get a lot of that thing where you get just enough truth to make it believable, and then a whole bunch of bullshit thrown in. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, but it does seem to be coming from him as well, not just people in his orbit. But some people say that he was never the head of anything that was official, and it was just basically a hobby of his while he was in the government. And I mean, there's just a bunch of trash floating around him, and it's very hard to figure out, well, what is true then?
Well, that television program he was a part of, Unidentified,
yes,
that ran for a couple of seasons, along with Chris Mellon, who was an undersecretary of defense for intelligence. All right, so this guy was high powered.
Mm-hmm.
All right, was high powered, and people like Dr. Hal Puthoff of the Central Intelligence Agency, and then the guy from Blink 182. How the hell he got into that mix, I have no idea. Okay, but the show ran for a couple of years. Now I got to tell you, I watched it. All right. I watched that show religiously when it was on because there were things that, being an ex-cop, all right, I basically wanted to see what I could pick up on. Now, Mark, you and I discussed this on a number of occasions. Now, one thing I noticed in almost every episode, there was a constant drumbeat where they were stressing that, and I'm paraphrasing, it's possible that this could be extremely dangerous.
Yep.
All right. There was a potential danger connected with this phenomenon. Now, I noticed that, and I made notes while I was watching this thing, and I was really aching to talk to these guys. So, through a series of events, Tracy Torme, been a longtime friend of this show. Tracy had been interviewed by me many times in the past years, basically became affiliated and associated with Elizondo. Now, my name is not unknown in the UFO field. I've been around a long time. And I told Torme, I said, I'd really like to speak to this guy. So Torme got in touch with him. I got his phone number, and I called him up. And he knew who I was. I'm sure he did a deep dive into my background. I'm sure of it.
Yeah.
And when I talked to him, and it was a very brief conversation, only a couple of minutes long, he said, well, I'm too busy right now. I can't talk to you, but I do want to talk to you. I'll tell you what, I'll give you a call this weekend. Well, he had my phone number. Never a freaking word. Couple of weeks go by. I called up Tracy and I said, hey, do you have any idea what's going on? No. I said, well, I'm going to try him again. So I called him back. And basically the same thing. Oh, Don, I'm so busy right now. I can't talk to you, but I'll call you up this weekend. Okay. This weekend was a very familiar trope with me. All right. Once again, nada, nothing. One more time, I called him up. One more time, he couldn't talk to me. He said, I'll call you. And I said, bullshit. All right. Fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, or is it shame on you? Anyway, I had enough of that. So something told me that I was Lou Elizondo's kryptonite to whatever the hell he was doing.
Well, let's remember as well to take it even further. In that show, yes, they kept bringing up these issues that there could be problems, it could be very dangerous. Well, Grusch comes out his first time, says his thing. Then he comes out the second time, and what does he say? Yes, there have been people murdered and killed and thrown in the desert due to this subject. So even his continued on, because when TTPS or whatever it's called, when that first came out, there was no talk about that, right? It's only when the show came out and it progressed to that same thing with Grusch. Second time he comes out, now there's murder involved and the death of people. I'm not going to say that didn't happen and hasn't happened. I think we'll agree that it has happened in various aspects of government and black ops and all that. But interesting, it takes the same path, right?
Yeah, I think, and there was something else I noticed. Now, before I became officially involved in the UFO field, and I've told you guys this before, when I was trying to make a decision on whether I wished to pursue this, I did a very intensive, roughly 6-month deep dive into UFOs. The history, the lore, the personalities. I mean, I went into it up to my eyebrows.
And I'm certain that wanting to bang Vicky had nothing to do with it.
No, actually, this was before her.
Oh, okay.
Smart ass. Anyway, when I came out, all right, I was up to snuff with a lot of stuff. And I had gone back. The golden age in my book for this field was in the 50s, all right? A lot of things were happening in the 50s. And then there was a resurgence in the 60s. Now, in the 50s, one of the bright lights of all of this is when the skies of Washington, D.C., in July and August of 1952, were basically invaded by these things. And it scared everybody. Harry Truman was still the president, okay? And the Pentagon, remember, we had just finished the most devastating world war in our history, well, at least that we're aware of, in our history, in all of human civilization. At the beginning of that war, there were still nations using horse cavalry, okay? Literally, guys on horses with swords and lances and guns too, of course. But I mean, and we finished that war, total of 6 years, from 39 to 45 using atomic power. So we literally went from horse flesh to atomic power, which was no small feat. Now, just a few years after that, these weird things start popping up everywhere. Now, granted, there were UFO sightings during the war, especially in the latter part of the war, the fall and winter of 1944 into 45. And in 46, there was another phenomenon known as the ghost rocket phenomenon that had everybody Twitter-pated. But then 47 happened. 1947, the Roswell incident happened. Now, God only knows what the upshot of that was. The government and the military lied through their teeth continuously about what this was. Initially, a World War II intelligence officer, Major, later Lieutenant Colonel, Jesse Marcel, himself was one of the original investigators that went out to check the site. He came back with a box full of strange material. If you've ever seen any of the old interviews with Marcel, he described what this material was. For example, and I'll just give you a couple, this stuff was so light, he described it like the cellophane on a pack of cigarettes, and everybody smoked back then. And he said, I tried to bend or break or dent this thing using a sledgehammer. Nothing. It just popped back into shape. Now, Marcel, within a few days, was basically humiliated. He went back to the 509th. Now, incidentally, at that time, there was only one nuclear weapons organization on the whole planet. And his outfit was it, the 509th Bomb Wing, the same guys that dropped the 2 atomic warheads on Japan. Okay, they were out in New Mexico. So, if this genuinely was basically extraterrestrial beings, that would have been someplace that they would have been very interested in. These guys had atomic weapons, all right? Atomic bombs. Nobody else had it anywhere. And they were also doing a lot of R&D, research development on new types of radar and other exotic items right there in New Mexico. So that would have been the place, if I were doing a recon on somebody, that I would have gone to. Now, with that being said, and as an aside, back in the 90s, on my very first radio show, which at the time was carried on CRN, the cable radio network, it was called UFOs Tonight, I interviewed Representative Stephen Schiff. Now, Schiff was the congressman from New Mexico. And Schiff had been convinced by his constituents to see if he could get the GAO, the Government Accounting Office, involved because they were trying to secure records, communication records, from the 509th during that time period, around 46, 47, 48, somewhere right in there. Roswell happened in 47, so that would have been right smack dab in the middle of it. All those records were gone. Illegally, I might add. They disappeared. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't need a house to fall on me like the Wicked Witch of the East to figure out something ain't kosher with that, right? And Schiff at the time agreed. And incidentally, not long after that, Schiff died of a very fast form of acting cancer. And over the years, there have been a number of mysterious deaths for that very reason. Now, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying it's one of those things that make you go, isn't that strange?
Allegedly.
Well, yeah, allegedly. So, so in the 50s, there was that. Then there were a number of other cases. Now I'm getting to a point. In the 60s, these things were making incursions here in the United States over nuclear weapons storage depots and missile sites. Now, this is a matter of public record today. But Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, David Grusch, none of those people with this disclosure stuff today have mentioned any of that, none of it. Nor have they mentioned how the government has gone out of its way to obfuscate everything about this topic. Now, since 2017, something amazing did happen. And that is the Navy, the United States Navy, came forward after disclosure of the Nimitz battle group incursions by the so-called Tic Tacs. Okay. Now, the one military organization that has kept totally, absolutely mum about any and all of this is the United States Air Force. The very guys that have been in charge of this investigation from the get-go. Now, a couple of surprising facts, and then I'm going to shut up. Around July 4th, 1947 is when Roswell happened. Within weeks of that incident, suddenly 3 things occurred that were amazing. Number 1, the National Security Act was signed into law. Now, what did that mean? Even at the height of the Second World War and the Manhattan Project, the most covert, classified, secret program in human history up to that point, making and developing the atomic bomb. Okay, we didn't have a National Security Act. 1947, suddenly we do. At that point, the Air Force was still a part of the United States Army. They did not have their own military organization. They were broken away by the Department of Defense and made into their own military organization. Why? I never figured that out. And finally, out of the blue, out of the smoke of the Second World War, the OSS, which had been our intelligence people basically fighting in Europe and the Pacific, they were intelligence geeks, went away. But they were replaced by the brand spanking new Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. Now, those 3 things in of itself wouldn't seem to, well, with the exception of the National Security Act, but they wouldn't seem to be a big thing. But I think they are a big thing because they happened in the immediate aftermath of whatever it was that crashed in Roswell, New Mexico. Guys, what do you think about all that?
Well, you know where I stand on that. I've always believed that was strange. That in a very short period of time after Roswell, Air Force broke from U.S. Army. The CIA was formed, and of course, because I wasn't even aware of that, the other one with the Security Act. You're the one who made me aware of that one. The other two are enough for me to say that there's something weird going on.
And those guys that did the alien autopsy were very clever, right? Their story, they tried to hook it up to Roswell and all that. It makes sense that they would put it at that time period because they wanted the cameraman to be off on his own. Why would he have been on his own? Because they split, right? I mean, it was very clever the way that they did that, where, oh, well, we just called this guy because everything split. We called him because he was available. Then they never called him back because they split, right? It was all a very clever, convenient ruse to have the cameraman as his own entity, even though he was involved with the military, but the military was totally dysfunctional and split up, and they lost track of him, etc. Very, very clever part of the ruse.
Well, yeah, we're going to have to, at some point, examine the so-called alien autopsy, Mark, because you were in the middle of that, okay, when it was happening back in the 90s. And, but that's, we're not going to have time for that tonight, but it is a fascinating story.
It's very clever, let's say that a lot of the stuff that's we're being told now is a ruse as well. The people who do this stuff, they're not stupid. They look at the background, they look at the history, they try to set this stuff up so it's somewhat believable. The more believable, the better, right? Of course.
Right.
Yes.
Now, I did, and I don't know if you want to play them, but I made them available for Martine. I have 3 videos that are from the final interview with Marcel that was done on In Search of, which he completely counterbacks and says, no, this is what happened. And he calls bullshit on what the U.S. Army Air Force said.
Absolutely. Yes. Let's, by all means.
Martin, can you grab those?
Let's see what you've got.
I'm looking for them.
They are in the main folder of Pop Culture Minefield on our OneDrive folder that we share.
I'm going to leave for just a second and reconnect with another browser because my computer is just wigging out. So I'll come back.
Okay, buddy.
Got you, pal.
Do you see them yet?
Yes, I'm downloading them right
Jess?
now. Yes. Dick. No.
I'm sorry.
No, don't be. It pleases me to see that you're.
What's the matter with you?
Your humor back.
Jew, Gary.
What you talking about? I also pulled up that link, and it's in the private chat here.
Yes.
From the thing that Tin Man brought up about this one's from Daily Mail about the flying 7-foot-tall alien that attacked Peruvians, and I it just sounds too whack to be real. It just sounds too whack, but it's there's
there was something called the Mothman once upon a time.
Yeah, man. So, but let's get that Marcel thing.
I'm on that.
Yay.
Your lack of faith disturbed me.
Darth Vader, Lord of the Sith, just Dark Lord of the Sith.
The Force is with you, young Skywalker, but you are not a Jedi yet.
Okay. Should I wait till Mark gets back?
No, just run it.
No, just go.
Okie dokie.
They took pictures, of course. They had a whole flock of microphones there. They wanted me they wanted some comments from me, but I wasn't at liberty to do that. So all I could do is keep my mouth shut. And General Ramey is the one who discussed, told the newspapers, I mean the newsmen, what it was and forget about it. It was nothing more than a weather observation balloon.
Yeah, that man was defamed and demeaned by Roger Ramey, who was general in charge.
There were
And
3 videos, by the
basically-
way.
Yes, I'm playing the second.
Okay.
We left Roswell perhaps around
There's one more after this.
3:30
Mm-hmm.
or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. As you can see, it's flat. It's very difficult. In fact, with just verbal directions, we never would have found it. We had to follow the rancher out there.
The crash site was so remote, it took an entire day to drive there.
The following morning, we went out to the site where the crash was. And what I saw, I couldn't believe there was so much of it. It was scattered over such a vast area. So we proceeded to pick up as much of the debris as we could, loaded in a wagon. We filled that up. It took us a good part of the day to do that, because it was such small fragments that we had to do a lot of picking. We found a piece of metal about a foot and a half to 2 feet wide and about 2 or 3 feet long. Felt like you had nothing in your hands. It wasn't any thicker than the foil out of a pack of cigarettes. But the thing about that got me is that you couldn't even bend it. You couldn't dent it. Even with a sledgehammer would bounce off it. So I knew that I had never seen anything like that before. And as of now, I don't know what it was.
Can I eat?
I have
Okay,
always believed
think
him.
I think that's all
Enough.
we need. That's enough.
Yeah.
So what of the I don't know, the haters, the misinformationers, I don't know if it's truthful or not, who say that Marcel was prone to tall tale telling?
That's crap. That's pure, unadulterated crap. Look, the rancher that
Mac
originally
Brazel.
went in to see the sheriff, Mac Brazel, okay, took some of this stuff in. He thought initially that it was an experimental aircraft or something that might have gone down. But it was definitely an air crash. Now, a lot of this gets lost today in the weeds, all right? But when Marcel and the other intelligence guy, counterintelligence guy, went out there, all right, Marcel was totally upfront about it. And the commander of the 509th at that time, Colonel Butch Blanchard, was the one that authorized the release, the press release, stating that the Army recovered a flying saucer. Okay. There were other skeptics and deniers and liars and people trying to pump the air full of bullshit that tried to suggest it was the press officer that made that release. No. This was one of the most elite military organizations in the world, if not the most elite at the time. And one thing they have is military discipline. And if you've never been in the service, the armed forces, you don't know what really is connected with military discipline. Nobody would have done something like that because they would have ended up and a bucket of crap. Let me tell you what.
Well, there's
So-
no way that Hout would have released it if he wasn't.
Walter
sure.
Hout,
There's
yeah.
no way that they would have not read it and dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's themselves, right? There's just no way. That's not the way it works.
Right, exactly. So, now Brazel, his son, later went into town one time. Now, this is sometime after the crash. The military had already gone out, cleaned up the site. All right. As a matter of fact, I found one of those guys in the spring of 94, ended up flying down to Texas and interviewed him. He was literally one of the people out on the ground picking up this debris, told me specifically that he saw several dead bodies and one that was still living, after the crash. He told me that they scoured that area, but of course, it's like if you've ever emptied a bag of sugar or flour into a canister, you never get it all out. Just like this crash site, there were still pieces and parts flying about. And Brazel Jr. began to find these things. He would pick them up and keep them. Well, he went into town, was sitting in a bar, drinking a bucket or two of beer, and he started talking about this. Before he knew it, the government was at his house demanding he hand over those pieces and parts of debris that he had been picking up. So, yeah, you can bet your ass this was no weather balloon or any other kind of a balloon. It was something distinctly out of this world,
Unearthly,
if you will.
Yep,
In
unearthly.
your research, can you tell us the public's awareness, because it did die out, and if my research comes to me correctly, when Stanton Friedman kind of reintroduced it to the public in 78, I think it was, at what point did it kind of die out until Stanton kind of got people interested in it again? In the 50s, not that long after?
Oh, yeah. You see, Ramey came out with a story, and as a matter of fact, somewhere I've got a facsimile of the news story that says either the government or the Air Force emptied the Roswell saucer.
Right.
It was a weather balloon. Now, that picture that they showed of a young Jesse Marcel was taken down at Fort Worth. This material he was holding in that news photograph was pieces and parts of a weather balloon.
Right.
They grabbed a weather balloon and took it down there. This was a way to divert everybody's interest away from the flying saucers. And, within a year or so, it was in the wind.
Wow, that's amazing, because today, if you have an ET episode in Las Vegas, immediately it explodes and it never really goes away, right? Because of the internet. But back then, you have this giant story that gets out as best as it can with radio.
Worldwide.
Right. With the radio and the newspapers. And then in a short amount of time, they kill it. And it stays dead for like 30 years then. Wow.
Yep.
Amazing.
Yeah, well, it was Friedman that brought it forward.
Right.
Then William Moore, who was a big UFO investigative name at that time,
Right.
came out with the book, The Roswell Crash. All right. And that really started the fuse burning on the whole thing. Then, within a couple of years, the next big thing that popped was the Bentwaters story.
Right.
Now, at that time period, and the Bentwaters happened at Christmas time, 1980. at that period of time, the world literally was teetering on the edge of war with the Soviet Union. The Russians had invaded Afghanistan. There were riots and demonstrations in Poland. Okay. The Bentwaters base was a forward air operating base housing, among other things, A-10 Warthogs and tactical nuclear weapons. Now, a nuke is a
Hold
nuke
that
is a nuke.
thought, Don, because Chanel needs to take us to commercial break.
Ah,
Do your
I
thing.
was going to check.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
Are you looking to go on a faraway journey that is magical and mysterious, reaping on mystical legends? If so, then Mysterious Adventure Tours is perfect for you. Imagine a voyage to explore ancient mysteries of Ireland, haunted majesties of Scotland, or their chilling Birth of the Vampires in Romania. These small, esoteric getaways are limited and do fill fast. So, go to MysteriousAdventureTours.com and book your trip soon.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
Oh, we're back. Okay.
Finish where you were at, buddy. What?
We may have to change our names to world-renowned researchers. I heard it right there in the commercial. Yeah, world-renowned.
Where the hell was I? What was I
I'm a
talking about?
multi-award-winning dickhead.
You talked about Bentwaters and then the nukes.
Oh, Bentwaters. Yes. Okay. So anyway, at that point, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Poland was in upheaval. Okay. Lech Walesa. Remember that name? That guy who later became the president of Poland.
Yeah.
Well, Bentwaters was a forward operating base that, among other things, housed A-10 Warthogs, which are aircraft designed specifically to shoot up Russian tank columns, because they were afraid that if war started and the Soviets attacked Western Europe, they would go through the Fulda Gap Okay. And basically, well, Europe would have been in a mess. There was nothing to stop them. Now, the tactical nukes that were housed at Bentwaters, okay, were small nukes, basically designed to take out troops, tank columns, that type of thing. But they were still nukes, all right? The fear was that if something were to happen, the Russians might send in Spetsnaz teams to neutralize bases like Bentwaters, all right? They were on high alert, and things could go into a bucket of manure really fast. Well, that's when this UFO incident happened. Now, we all heard about the airmen that were out in the forest, people like John Burroughs and others, okay, where this thing came in. Colonel Halt, okay, was out there with his tape recorder. There were a lot of things happening. This was not like some of the pundits and skeptics tried to suggest, light from a lighthouse.
That's what
All
Phil
right?
Class said. Come on.
Yeah, that's what Class had to say. But it was pretty spooky. Now, this went all the way up into the upper echelons of the Department of Defense, whatever that was. Hey, another nuclear base incursion. Here were these UFOs coming in, hovering above where the nukes were stored, observed shining some kind of light down. Now, remember, in times past, these UFOs literally knocked our first line of defense, ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, offline. If something would have happened, none of them would have been able to be fired. All right. They were just basically turned off, like somebody unplugged them. So whatever was up there, okay, was serious and had some technological magic that could really put us in the so-called trick sack. But hey, you know, just another case of, hey, UFOs aren't real. Hey, UFOs are not a threat to national security. And if you believe that, I've got a bridge for sale.
So, Big Don Ecker, do you think that the latest information that's been released, be it from Lou or that show or the ranch, what's going on? What's your feeling on ultimate disclosure, Mr. Ecker?
Well, as I've said continuously, ultimate disclosure will never happen.
Unless it's not under their control, right? I mean, it could happen, but they won't be in control of it.
Well, we got our answer when, you know, all the branches were told to turn over their information. And the Air Force said, no, we're not going to. Not going to do it. So
see,
that's
here's the rumor. And let me stress, this is a rumor. I've got no way to verify it, none at all. But one of the big secrets, I think, well, there are actually two items that would be of interest to me. Number one, in one of these crashes, something was discovered by whoever went out to handle these crashes. And on board the crashed object, the craft, were human bodies. Now, take that for whatever it's worth, all right? Whether they were people that were picked up and abducted, whether they were actually the operators of the craft, human beings, I don't know. But I heard that years ago. The other thing, okay, that I think is worth exploring. David Grusch, in his testimony, open testimony in Congress, said that the military, the government, whoever, have at least a dozen recovered craft, maybe more. Now, I thought about that a lot. And if these devices are as technologically advanced as they're purported to be, all right, it never made sense to me that these things would be dropping out of the sky. What? The oil wasn't checked by the alien technicians, or their gravity generators suddenly quit working because it wasn't lubed? No.
Hey, wait a minute. I'll play the other side. Let's say you're in New Mexico, as Don said when he was working on his last quarter that we put in him. And let's say that they were testing all sorts of different known and to us unknown radar and sonar and all this stuff, and they happened upon some kind of technology that they were fiddle farting around with, and it started to knock these things down.
Well, never say never. I could never argue
that's our technology,
the possibility.
Their technology that's thousands of years or millions of years ahead of us, right? So,
exactly.
Right.
Now, if any of those craft are from another star system, flying from there to here, regardless of how they do it, warp drive or wormholes, God knows.
Right.
Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah,
they
I
would
don't
have
think
encountered
there's anything that would get in the way of.
But here's what might. Okay. And this is the point that I was aiming at.
Mm-hmm.
A dozen or more recovered craft. And we've got reports from these things falling down all over the planet. China, Russia, the United States, of course, South America, Africa.
Yeah.
Africa. Okay. What else might cause that? Well, I came to the conclusion, and I've heard and literally since I've started this business, 30 plus years of people talking to people, that one possibility is there's an ongoing conflict out in space, in our solar system. Okay, various groups of extraterrestrials, or hell, who knows, perhaps even interdimensional beings popping in here with their ships. But somebody ain't getting along with somebody. And even in Russia, in Siberia, I've gotten reports from a former Soviet journalist that they observed warfare in the skies above Siberia. Of course, that's out in the middle of God's own half acre, okay? That's so remote. But these things shooting at each other. Now, if there is conflict going on out there, and these craft get shot up, and they can make it to Earth, what's going to happen? They're going to crash land. That could be another reason. Now, regardless, the core secret of whatever that may be, it may be the fact that human bodies have been discovered on some of these, or proof that there's ongoing warfare. Now, either of those stories, if they ever broke in mainstream news, a lot of people would freak out if they heard that. Okay? A lot of people would freak. I think that
you discovered footage of that with the, STS-48 discovery back in 91. I think that was some shit going on that the shuttle captured.
Yep.
That was not human.
No. Not the object itself, the flying object. The weapons system.
See, I question that too.
I don't know. I kind of thought, you see, back in the 80s and the early 90s, at UFO Magazine, we did a special issue on President Reagan's Star Wars initiative. And one of the weapons systems that they were working on was called Brilliant Pebbles. Okay. Now, basically, what that was a space-based weapon that was basically imagine this huge, gigantic shotgun firing pellets at hypervelocity at climbing ICBM missiles. In other words, let's say North Korea or China or Russia decided to launch some nukes at us. These things could have shot them down or were designed to shoot them down before they could re-enter Earth's atmosphere and have a nuclear explosion. So the basic idea was that, well, that's what it looked like to me when I first saw that video. Somebody sent it to me from back east, a UFO researcher by the name of Donald Ratch. And that's the first thing that came to my mind, that it might be a Star Wars weapon. But regardless, they missed. This thing moved too quickly for it to hit it.
We shared the video in the private chat if anybody wants to play it. STS-48. But hey, guys, I'm done. I'm exhausted, man.
Go watch a Gal Gadot movie. Just go watch a Gal Gadot movie and have a good time.
All right, guys. Man, this has been a fun show, Don. I'm looking forward to doing this every Monday. So
okay, well, I hope you get feeling better, pal.
Oh, I will. Once I get the antibiotics in me, I'll be doing good. And so you guys have a good night and enjoy the last 45 minutes of the show. Bye.
See ya.
Bye, Chanel.
Okay.
Bye, boss.
See you later, Martin.
So, Don, it's interesting. You bring up that, let's say that humans were found. Okay. So we're always told that these things are moving and doing maneuvers so fast and the G's are so high that it would turn a human body into jelly. So if there were humanoids close to us on there, that clearly means that they have some sort of technology on board to keep the humans from being squished like bugs, right?
Yeah, something along the line. If you are familiar and if you've ever read much science fiction, now I'm sure if our technology advances far enough, we may even develop these things. But in the annals of sci-fi, they're called inertial dampeners.
Right.
In other words, something within the craft that will protect the pilots from the forces of gravity, which would, you're right, squash them like strawberry jelly on the back wall.
That brings up an interesting thing that I've not ever thought of before. Let's say I'm not a huge proponent of abductions, not saying they don't happen, but if the abductions happen and the people go on the ships, and let's say the ships split for a while, go somewhere, and then come back with the people, that's never really been talked about much from what my research has shown of people on one hand saying we couldn't be in those ships because it'll turn us into jelly, but on the other hand saying people are being abducted and we don't know where they're going with these people, how fast they're flying with these people and such, right? But that's never really been discussed as far as I know about.
Well, one actually, to an extent, it has.
All right.
And that's with the Travis Walton disappearance. Okay. Travis Walton, I'm sure anybody that's tuned into this show knows the story or the rough outline.
I didn't hear about that being discussed.
Yeah. Walton was a logger. Okay. He had a crew that was out. They were working on a contract. And basically, so the story goes, this UFO flew in, showed up. They were all in their truck, I guess getting ready to go back to home base or whatever. And Walton jumped out of the truck and ran up to where this UFO was hovering above the trees. And as he ran toward it, a beam flashed out of the craft, struck him, and boom, he was out. That was it. Okay. Now, the rest of the guys in his crew observed this, and they got the hell out of Dodge.
See ya.
Okay. And a little bit later, they did come back, and Walton was not there. Now, he was gone for almost a week. No idea. The loggers were being examined by the police, state police, local cops, whatever. They thought it was possible that they had murdered Travis Walton and then disposed of the body somewhere. They were working on that assumption. Now, the guy that was in charge, Mike Rogers, okay, at the time, he was Walton's brother-in-law, all right? And that's another story that goes a long, long way, okay, in this annal. But I think it was 5 days later, Walton shows up. Seemingly fine, all right? He was picked up, taken to a hospital. They did a lot of tests on him. And according to Travis, he was only gone a short time. Now, somewhere along the line, somebody came up with the theory that that beam that hit him killed him. And the reason they picked him up was to revive him, okay, on board the craft. And then there was a story where Walton came to on board the craft. All right. He was surrounded by a bunch of little guys like the Grays. He jumped up off the table or whatever he was lying on, grabbed an object, and started swinging at these little guys. Imagine yourself if you were in that situation. If it happened like this, all right, you'd be freaked out of your mind, right?
Yep.
And while he was doing this, suddenly, in the annals of UFO lore, a couple of blondes came in. They came into the room where he was, okay, didn't speak to him, but got him to put the whatever he was using as a club down. They walked him out of there. And once again, Walton claims they never talked to him. All right. He didn't exchange any information. But then they took him back close to where he was picked up, dropped him off, and took off. So now, in our time, something like 5 days or maybe 6 days elapsed. But according to him, only a few hours. Now, make of that what you will. Did they shoot up into space, so to speak, go into hyperspace and come back? And in our time, 5 days had passed, but only a very short time for him. I don't know. But these are things that I've thought about and considered.
Yeah, it's just I never really, to be honest, I never really did think about it that much. Is that if we're on board and they're doing what they do, then there's some way to protect the human body from being turned into jelly. Yeah, which contradicts what we hear about the Tic Tac. Let's say there's humans on the Tic Tac or something, kind of contradicts that. Or I don't know. It goes deeper and deeper, Don. I mean,
you go down a rabbit hole with this stuff.
Right. And they can contradict it on purpose, right? To try to obfuscate the technology that they have. One guy brought up in the chat there, Corso, and we both know that book is suspect. I mean, for no other reason than it was pretty much written by the co-author and not Corso. But it's another one of those clever interjections into the subject, right? Just like the autopsy was.
Well, I knew Colonel Corso.
Sure.
Okay. As a matter of fact, I got a letter from him. I still have it, where he was pissed at me. At that point, I had no contact with him.
For questioning him?
He was pissed at me because of an article I wrote he thought was about him, and it wasn't. And I wrote him back, and I said, Colonel, I said, first off, look, I have the utmost respect for you, for your military career. I am a Vietnam vet, okay? I served in a combat zone. I was wounded in combat, and I would never cast aspersions on a fellow combat veteran. Well, obviously, depending upon the situation.
Right.
But I said, no, that was not me, or was not you that I was writing about. Okay? And then he got back to me, and we started a correspondence. Now, he was going to come out to California, okay, for something, and we were supposed to get together prior to him dying, all right? He died before he could do it. But I did talk to him. And one of the things I asked him about his book, and he was steamed about a lot that went into that book. A lot of it was his material. For example, Project Horizon. If you remember that book, there had been a Pentagon plan in the late 50s, okay, to create a manned lunar base on the moon.
Right.
It was a Pentagon plan, a military, okay? That was all Corso. But I asked him about the inscription on the book by that senator, and I can't think of
Strom
Thurmond.
Yep.
Strom Thurmond.
Yep.
Okay. And if you remember in there, Thurmond talked about, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't remember the exact words, the Roswell situation, or Roswell, okay? And then, as soon as that book came out and people saw that, they started snowing under his office, Thurmond's office,
Yep.
about this thing. And Thurmond, his spokesman, not him, denied anything having to do with the Roswell incident.
Well, he said something to the effect of when he wrote the foreword to it, he didn't really know what the book was about, or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, Corso, I knew about Corso before any of this Roswell stuff came out. All right. The reason I knew about him, because back in those days, I was very active in the MIA POW thing. Now, if you go back and you look at all the guys, mostly guys, there were some women too, that were captured during wartime, World War II, Korea, and at that time, Vietnam. Guys that never came back, that never showed up. And there was a hell of a lot of good reason to suspect that, especially the NVA, the North Vietnamese, had kept hold of a bunch of POWs they had captured during the war and never turned loose. And the Pentagon knew about it. Okay, they knew about it. And it was Corso that was fighting the good fight, trying to get some closure on all those people that were disappeared, gone. Okay, so I knew his name. I knew who he was. And then this Roswell thing happened. Well, look, the guy was in charge of a nuclear weapons battery in Europe, Corso. Okay, he was the commander. And if war would have broken out, he personally had the authority to fire his nukes at the Russians, because it would have been the Russians. Now, would they have given that to a crackpot? He was on the National Security Council with Eisenhower, okay? The guy was a committed anti-communist. And even in those days, he took a lot of heat and flack for that. Now, what exactly was it that Corso claimed in the book that made him so controversial? That he had technology funneled to him that purportedly came from the Roswell debris, all right, that he then fed into industry, all right, to get stuff like night vision goggles, all right, night vision, okay, which is, and what the hell were the capacitors in computers? Now, there was a lot of controversy about the capacitors.
Well, it's problematic because there was a lot done on those long before Corso got involved.
Right. But Corso, even in World War II, the Germans had active night vision, infrared.
Right.
Okay. Infrared. They could see, but you can detect infrared. I've got a night vision monocle here, monocular, I guess. Is that the right word? Monocular? Yeah, I've got one here that can detect infrared when I'm using it at night, if there's any infrared flying around. It's a first generation monocular. Okay. And what are they now? Third and fourth generation, I guess, which this stuff is practically magic. But when I got this in the 90s, all right, it was a whole new world. It was very similar to what I had available in Vietnam. Okay, so, you know, I can take this thing outside. I can look around my yard. I don't have to turn on the lights. I can see what's happening with it. But it is a marvelous invention. But now these things have been around for over 50 years.
Well, let's say.
So what the hell do they have now?
Given the fact of his bona fides, and he's got a lot of them, but given the fact as well that he was older when the book was done, evidently he didn't have either the wherewithal or the necessary tools at his disposal to stop the book's publication, even though he knew that there was a bunch of horse shit in it too, right? So then where does he fall, right? Where exactly does he fall in the annals of all of this?
Well, after he died, he had a son.
Yeah.
That was raising a ruckus.
Yes, he was.
About that. And I lost touch with it. Hey, I knew some of those people involved with this, and I had no desire, none, to get involved with them.
If I recall correctly, there was some stuff that went down in Italy in that language about the disclosure and the clearing up of some of this, but it never really made it here in a big way. I remember in the 90s, I remember I was reading some stuff from his son that there was like a convention there in Italy, and they were trying to clear this stuff up, but I don't think it ever gathered enough traction.
Well, I kind of recall something about that, Mark.
Yeah, I do.
But to tell you the truth, it's been too long ago.
Right. And again, the bottom line is it's kind of a dead story now, except, of course, within the subject, like the autopsy, like the guys from Snowflake, all like the Billy Meyer and stuff. It all seems to peter out, doesn't it? So I'm wondering if this Grusch thing is going to peter out, because certainly for you and me, I think, I don't want to speak for you, but Skinwalker has petered out for me. I've had enough. It's like, yeah.
Well, it's like, look, TV. I've had my fill.
Well, it's not only the TV; it's the book.
But here's my point. My point.
All right.
TV is the beast that must continually be fed.
Just like YouTube. Yep.
Exactly. You have to keep it coming. Well, after a while, you've used up all the good stuff. Now you got to manufacture it.
Absolutely.
And that's exactly, in my opinion. Now, this is my opinion. That's what happened with the Skinwalker Ranch business.
But it started before that, because when the newscaster from Vegas wrote that book, as interesting as the book may be, there's no teeth in that book at all. And this whole thing was based on that book for the most part. Granted, there's stories and all that, but my goodness, that book was pretty much useless.
You're talking about George Knapp, right?
Yeah. There's no slap on Knapp. They did what they did, but that book is pretty useless, Don.
Well, I have that book. I read it. When it first came out, I was very taken with what George uncovered. Vicki and I drove over to Vegas right after that book came out. We had dinner with Knapp.
Mm-hmm.
And Skinwalker Ranch was the story.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to be given permission to go out to the ranch and spend a couple of days out there. Yep. I wanted to roam around it. I wanted to do this. And I asked George if he would intervene with Bob Bigelow, because Bigelow was the head HMFIC. All right. He was the guy that could say yay or nay. Well, Knapp got back to me and said that Bigelow said nay. Now, I had other tenuous connections going out with Bigelow. And Bigelow, for whatever reason, and this is the only thing I can presume, for whatever reason, didn't care for me, didn't like me. All right. I knew a guy, a film producer, I met through Richard, and this guy was hired by the Bigelow people to do an ad for his hotel motel empire. Okay. And they thought because at that time, I was the director of research for UFO magazine, was on TV all the time, was doing my radio show, that I would be a perfect spokesperson. So they shot a video of me talking about the product that they were trying to push. And the guy's name was Steve McMahon. McMahon took it down to show Bigelow. He saw it was me and he said no. So I don't know.
Well,
that struck me as kind of funny.
Yeah, well, not to blow smoke up your dress for you, but there aren't that many people in ufology who will call a spade, or at least really question people, right? right? So there is no way that somebody like Lou, who, you know, decided that you were too much for him to deal with, Grusch, none of these guys, none of the bass player from the punk band, none of these guys are going to open himself up to hardened questions from somebody with 40 years in the subject. They're just not going to do it. They're not going to do it. I mean, I know you had a dinner with Greer, and that was the end of it. You have a dinner, and it's over, and then there's nothing. No fruit is born from that. Clearly, because he picked up on it. He knows, right? Especially he's talked to other people, right? But then it pisses off somebody like Horn, Michael Horn, the guy who's, you know, the American spokesperson for the Billy Meyer case. He gets pissed at you because you won't have him on. So it goes both ways.
Well, I did. He, speaking of him, I don't know, I guess maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I had a mail email system set up strictly for my radio show. And I used to publicize that if anybody wanted to get in touch with UFO Magazine or me or whatever, this is where you go. And it was on Yahoo. And one day I got an email from him. Now, look, if you want somebody to do something, okay, especially if you don't know them, you come across, or at least you should if you're not a moron, you come across as polite and respectful, right?
Sure, yeah.
And I get this email from him calling me basically a cowardly piece of shit because I've never had him on my radio show. And, you know, hey, look, by that time, I knew everybody worth knowing in the UFO field. And out of everybody I knew, very, very few people had anything good to say about Mike Horn. So I knew that up front. Yep. And then I get this, and my attitude is, and you want me to invite you onto my show? And you talk to me like that? So no.
You want to be my latex salesman? I don't think
so.
Yeah. And it's funny because I haven't kept up on him in a long time, but in 20 years ago, he was out there, right? I mean, if you weren't even trying to keep up on him, you would stumble upon his stuff, be it on Twitter or YouTube or his website, or he would be on some of these shows, right? Was he on Bell's show at all? I don't remember if he was.
I can't say. I don't know. I don't think he was, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
So he'd have Sean David Morton on there, but he wouldn't have Horn. That tells you something right there.
Yeah. Well, you know, Sean David was passing himself off as a world-class psychic. So, you know, he was predicting earthquakes and tsunamis and all this stuff. And that was exciting radio on our show.
It was. And I know
Art never would ask these guys like him or Dr. Jonathan Reed the hard questions. All right.
Right. When I saw back in the 90s or maybe the early 2000s, I used to go to a lot of the conventions. And when I saw Sean David there, he was still in that mode of Area 51, and he was the collector of the videos before there was YouTube and things, so you really couldn't see this stuff. So you'd pay your $25 and you'd go in and he would show all of these cool videos, right? And like Jaime Maussan, and you would look at these things and go, well, gee, these are really cool, and I don't know what to make of these things. But if you were to question these guys at all, and I questioned Maussan at a breakfast that I had with him, and I questioned Sean David at the thing I paid the $25 for, it would never go well. right? Basic questions too. What was on the tape before this clip? What was on the tape after this clip? I don't know. I don't know. Well, shouldn't you know this? Should you have this to show this to us to say, oh, it's a kid's birthday party? Then it cuts because they still have the tape in the camcorder, and then it like goes up to the sky and it shows this thing, and then what happened? We don't know. You don't know. You're a researcher and you don't know what happened. Well, it was crazy. It was crazy. That was one of the reasons I did what you did. Kind of backed out because you would ask these guys honest, open questions about stuff that they should know, right? Why did you take the wobbly saucer in Mexico City that goes behind the building, right? We've all seen that from the 90s. Why did you take that footage and release it on 60 Minutos or whatever show he had then? We're talking about Musan, and then ask for eyewitnesses after the fact. Why did you do that? Why did you do that? I know why you did it, but could you tell me publicly why you did that? No, I'm not going to tell you why I did this.
Well, that's the problem, Mark. Look, this is unlike the practice of medicine or engineering or any occupation you can think of or profession where you have to go to school, for example, study the topic, the subject, get yourself basically certified.
Right.
If you're a doctor, if you're a doctor in training, you've got to do an internship. You've got, the master doctor is keeping an eye on you for what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. And anybody can have, for example, a UFO sighting and suddenly hang a shingle up and say, hey, I'm a ufologist.
Well, that's me.
Let's talk about your UFO sighting.
Yeah.
By the way, what planet did they come from? That kind of thing. So,
and we could name names, of course, and a lot of these people are very well known, where you'll have some people who get involved in the thing and they're very focused on, be it Roswell or whatever, and they kind of run out of steam. And we know why they run out of steam. They run out of facts, or hopeful facts, right? Hopefully honest facts. But then you have these guys who just keep on piling it on, man. Keep on piling it on. That Stone guy that you always like to bang on found a bunch of good documents and stuff at first, but it wasn't good enough. It wasn't good enough.
I just told somebody about Cliff Stone. Now look,
Cliff Stone, right?
I knew Cliff for years. Cliff was a very nice guy, but he caught that UFO virus where, and this is something I never really gave a damn about, keeping my name in lights. I just never cared about that. I do what I do. For example, you can find me here now. This is what I do. Good, bad, indifferent. If you don't like it, don't tune in. If you do like it, I hope you keep watching. But the bottom line was Cliff felt, I guess, that he needed to do more. And before you knew it, he was basically the 007 James Bond of the UFO field.
Right.
He had a secret colonel that would brief him and debrief him in Vietnam, and Cliff was in Vietnam. And this was something that I about went into orbit when after we took on business partners for the magazine, before Vicki and I finally said, that's it, we're done.
Right.
He basically sent in this article that I read, and I went apoplectic, okay? Talking about being out on a fire base in the middle of the goddamn jungle. And he was contacted by this UFO guy, Colonel, and he went sneaking out through the wire, okay, into the jungle to meet this guy, to be briefed or debriefed or whatever. And I read that and I said, my God, I've never read such bullshit in my life. So I had an argument, I mean a genuine knockdown, drag out argument with the other partners about this. And the best I could get out of it was writing my own article to run right next to his to basically say, don't believe this guy is full of shit.
Right.
Okay. And that's what I did. So then the true believers, I would get angry at me.
Oh,
Suddenly, I wasn't a researcher. I was a debunker.
Yes.
Okay. Well, no. I was just a former criminal investigator that knew where to do the investigation and follow the facts and come to my conclusion and then document my conclusion. And if you didn't like it, well, I'm sorry, but there it is.
Yeah, it's interesting now though, Don. We go from Sean David, Clifford Stone, Hoagland to some extent, and a lot of these researchers and such, and we go from these interesting videos and stories that actually will perk your interest to just craziness to this stuff now in front of Congress, right? Totally different now, but kind of the same. Because
look, you gotta have some historical background on this. Back in the 50s, Donald Kehoe,
right,
okay, who was a retired U.S. Marine Corps aviator that had been really disabled in an air crash in the late 20s or early 30s. As a matter of fact, Kehoe took the first American air wing and flew into, what the hell was that country? I forget now. But to open up an American base there, he had a crash. He ended up being invalided out of the Marine Corps. Now, they did call him back during World War II, but not for active duty overseas, but he worked at the Pentagon, okay? All hands on deck, World War II, right?
Right.
All hands.
Right.
So he was by then a noted aviation journalist. Now, in the 50s, he took over NICAP, the National Investigative Committee on Aerial Phenomenon. And this is a matter of historical interest. On the NICAP board of directors were some real heavyweights. And one of them at that time was a classmate of Kehoe. Kehoe went to Annapolis, the Naval Academy. And one of his classmates was Roscoe Hillenkotter, who was an admiral by that time and the first director of the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. And what they were trying to do in the 50s and the early 60s was to get congressional hearings in Congress. And they were continually blocked by, among others, the U.S. Air Force.
Again.
Now, today, what's happening in Congress with the UFO thing is amazing. Kehoe would have been dancing a jig if he could have seen this. So the fact that it is being discussed in Congress, just that to me is big things.
Yeah. I agree. And Keogh did some amazing research. I mean, the people he talked to and the papers he wrote and things. Most people don't know about this, of course, because it's not easily available. But
well, a lot of books, 5 or 6 books.
Yeah, true.
On the subject that were eye-opening, to say the least. Now, remember, at the height of his writing career, there was no internet. There were no personal computers. There was no Twitter or anything else. They call it X now. I don't get that. But there was only one way, well, a couple of ways you could get this information. TV, and they very seldom ever did anything on UFOs outside of science fiction.
Right.
Newspapers, there was a basic blockade on newspapers doing legitimate UFO stories.
And the radio.
And there weren't many talk shows like this,
right.
Although there were a couple. Frank Edwards, for example, was one that shone a spotlight on UFO stories. Edwards was noted for that. But, other than that, nothing except, well, like Kehoe's books. Another guy that surprisingly, this is a name that's probably even more obscure today than Donald Kehoe, Ivan Sanderson, who was a Brit by nationality, and in the Second World War, he was a Brit intelligence officer. But he discovered a fascination with the UFO thing. He wrote several books on it. So yeah, but other than that, Coral and Jim Lorenzen of April wrote a series of books. Right. I mean, the topic wasn't totally submerged, but
no. So when it comes to
2 minutes, Mark, 2 minutes, and we're going to have to wrap it up.
When Grusch was asked about the crashes and the biologicals, and he said, "I gave all that information to the proper place." What's your over on ever finding that information out?
Well, let's just put it this way. I am not hopeful that a lot of this will end up coming out, but I'm still in the wait and the see mode.
Sure.
This story is not over yet, okay? It's not done. It's not complete. And I'm waiting to see if anybody in Congress or whatever are going to query the Air Force. Now, look,
right?
I'm not hopeful with that either. But ask yourself this. If the President of the United States is not included in the bigot list to be read into this program, what hope does Congress have with getting any of the really deep, juicy secrets? We'll just have to wait and see. You never know what the hell's going to happen.
Oh, yeah. I'm thinking if disclosure happens, it's going to be despite these people. Something's going to happen beyond their control, be it from an outside force or an inside force.
Look, here's the bottom line, buddy. Bottom line is the aliens could basically do disclosure in a hot minute if they wanted to.
Absolutely.
If they chose to. Hey, that's it, gang. For this edition of Dark Matters, we will be back in 1 week. And Mark, unfortunately, we're out of time. Martine, thank you.
Thank you
for
Martine.
Everything you've done during the show. And Chanel, our producer, as always, a stellar job. Hey, we'll see you next week, gang. Take care.
Giddy up.
Bye.